When my boss leaned close and whispered, "If you want that raise, earn it tonight," I didn't realize she wasn't testing my ambition. She was testing my heart. It was past 9 when the last of the office lights went out, except for hers. Her office always looked different at night. Less like a room, more like a stage. The glass walls turned into mirrors, reflecting the city's glow. I could see her silhouette standing by the window, one hand in her pocket, the other holding her glasses. I'd just finished the quarterly report she'd been waiting on for days. My hands were still trembling from the pressure. She was the kind of CEO who could read a single typo and know the state of your soul. I knocked once. She didn't turn around. "Leave it on the desk," she said. Her voice was low, tired, but still carried that quiet authority that made the air feel heavier. I placed the folder down and was about to leave when she finally looked up. Her eyes lingered on me for a moment. Not cold, not warm, just searching. "You've been asking for that raise, haven't you?" she said. The question caught me off guard. I nodded before I could think. That's when she stepped closer. The city lights caught the edge of her hair, dark brown with faint silver threads, each one catching light like truth she didn't bother to hide. She stopped just near enough for her perfume to reach me. Something subtle, like cedar and coffee. Her eyes didn't waver. "If you want that raise," she whispered, her voice barely above the hum of the air conditioner, "earn it tonight." And then she turned away, picking up her coat, leaving me alone in that dim office with nothing but the sound of her heels fading down the corridor. For a moment I didn't breathe. The words hung in the air, twisting into meanings they probably shouldn't have. My mind raced. Did she mean it that way? Was she joking? Testing me? She'd never crossed a line before. She didn't seem like the type who would. But something in her tone, not playful, not commanding, felt layered, like it was hiding something beneath. I stood there staring out at the same skyline she had been watching. The glass reflected my own confusion back at me. In it, I looked smaller than I felt 5 minutes ago. That whisper, "Earn it tonight," didn't sound like temptation. It sounded like a challenge, or maybe a confession wrapped in discipline. As I rode the empty elevator down, I could still hear her voice echoing faintly in my head. I tried to shake it off, but it clung to me the way her scent lingered. Impossible to name, impossible to forget. I told myself it was just another long night at work. But deep down, I knew something had shifted, in her tone, in the air between us, and maybe in me too. That night I didn't sleep. I kept replaying that moment, the whisper, the way her eyes softened for half a second before she turned away. And I realized, this wasn't about a raise anymore. It was the beginning of something neither of us had asked for. The next morning, the office felt different, brighter, louder, but emptier in a way I couldn't explain. Maybe it was just me. Maybe it was her words still looping in my head like a half-remembered song. She was already in when I arrived. Immaculate as ever, her navy suit crisp, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. No trace of last night's whisper, no hint that anything unusual had passed between us. When our eyes met across the glass-walled conference room, she simply nodded once and looked away. I told myself I imagined it all, that the whisper was nothing but stress playing tricks on me. But every time she spoke, every instruction she gave, I heard that same voice beneath it, low, deliberate, impossible to forget. As the day dragged on, I found myself watching her the way you watch the ocean. From a distance, trying to read the surface while knowing the real current runs deeper. She was composed, efficient, but her shoulders tensed when no one was looking. She rubbed at her temple during calls, sighed quietly between sentences. There was something human beneath the perfection, something fragile. At lunch, I caught a glimpse of her in the break room, standing alone with her phone in hand. She wasn't scrolling, just staring at the screen as if waiting for a message that wouldn't come. The fluorescent light made her look a little older, and somehow more real. When she noticed me, she straightened instantly, that polished CEO mask sliding back into place. "Everything on schedule?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," I replied. That was all. But for the first time, her eyes didn't hold authority. They held exhaustion. Later that evening, I lingered after hours, pretending to finish a spreadsheet I'd already sent. Through the glass, I could see her office door half open. She sat at her desk, head in her hands. The city light poured over her like water, turning her into something softer, almost fragile. I didn't go in. Couldn't. I wasn't sure if I wanted to comfort her or understand her or just protect the image I had of her, the one that made me want to be better. The whisper replayed again. Earn it tonight. Maybe it wasn't about desire. Maybe she'd meant earn my trust, my belief, my respect. Maybe she was daring me to rise to her level, not fall for the illusion of closeness. Still, the thought of her voice, that quiet tremor buried inside confidence, stayed with me long after I left. I realized then that what unsettled me wasn't the words themselves. It was the possibility that she'd said them not out of power, but out of loneliness. And for the first time, I wanted to know who she was when the glass doors closed and the city stopped watching. 2 weeks passed before she called me into her office again. It was almost 8 p.m., the hour when the building emptied, and ambition stayed behind to flicker under fluorescent light. She didn't look up when I entered, just gestured toward the chair opposite her desk. We need to fix the presentation for the board. Tonight. Her tone was clipped, but I caught something under it. A tremor, maybe fatigue, maybe something more human. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. A stack of papers sat beside her coffee cup, and the city lights outside painted soft streaks across her face. I'll order food, I said. She paused, then nodded. Something light. I can't handle anything heavy this late. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, just dense. For hours we sat side by side, words reduced to numbers, notes, and brief glances. I could feel her presence, her quiet control, her restraint. Every so often, she'd lean close to point at the screen, and her perfume, sandalwood and rain, would linger just long enough to pull me somewhere I shouldn't go. At one point, her hand brushed mine as we both reached for the same document. It was nothing, a second, a mistake. But she froze. Her hand didn't move right away. Then she drew it back slowly, as if reminding herself where the lines were. I didn't say anything. Neither did she. But after that, the air changed. She spoke less like a boss and more like a person. We started talking about the little things, her first failed startup, my student loans, how the office coffee always tasted like regret. When she laughed, it wasn't the polished CEO laugh I'd heard in meetings. It was soft, almost shy. For the first time, I saw her as someone alone at the top. Her success hadn't insulated her. It had isolated her. Around midnight, she leaned back in her chair, eyes closed. You remind me of myself when I started, she said quietly. Restless, wanting to prove something, thinking that working harder would make people see you differently. I didn't know what to say. The city outside looked unreal, blue and gold and endless. You're wrong, I said softly. People already see you. Her eyes opened, tired, surprised, but alive. For a heartbeat, the mask slipped. There was warmth there, sadness too. We went back to work, but the silence had changed again. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was comfortable, almost intimate. When the final slide came together at 1:17 a.m., she exhaled and smiled. You did well tonight, she said, but I could tell she wasn't talking about the work. As I packed up, I caught her looking at me. Not with authority, not with distance, just quietly, as if trying to remember what trust felt like. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just earning her approval anymore. I was earning a place in the world she never let anyone see. The night the storm came, the office felt like a ship lost at sea. Rain lashed against the glass walls, wind howled through the vents, and thunder rolled across the skyline. By the time the power flickered, we were the last two people left on the entire floor. She stood by the window, arms folded, staring down at the city as if sheer will could control the weather. The emergency lights painted her in soft gold and shadow. No boardroom armor, no perfection. Just her. I told everyone to go home hours ago, she said quietly. You didn't, I replied. She turned her head slightly, one eyebrow raised, a faint smile threatening to appear. Someone had to finish the proposal. Lightning flashed, and for a moment I saw her face illuminated. Tired, vulnerable, but still composed. When the power finally cut out completely, we both exhaled in the dark. "Well," she murmured, "I guess that's our cue to stop pretending we're invincible." We gathered a few candles from the break room and lit them on her desk. The flickering light softened everything. The glass, the steel, even her. It made the space feel smaller, warmer, like the world had folded itself around us. Without her usual sharpness, she looked younger. Or maybe just more human. She slipped off her heels, tucked her feet beneath her on the couch, and gestured for me to sit across from her. "You ever get tired of trying to be taken seriously?" she asked after a long pause. "All the time," I admitted. "But I think you've had it worse." She let out a quiet laugh, then leaned back, watching the candlelight dance. "You have no idea. Every meeting, every headline, every person waiting for me to mess up so they can call me lucky instead of capable." I listened not as her employee, but as someone who understood what it meant to want to be seen for more than your title. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain softened, turning into a steady rhythm that felt almost safe. She rubbed her hands together for warmth, and without thinking, I slid my jacket across the desk toward her. Her eyes lifted to mine, a small, genuine look of surprise. She hesitated, then took it. "Thank you," she whispered, voice barely audible above the rain. Something shifted right then. Not in words, but in the silence that followed. She wasn't the CEO and I wasn't her subordinate. We were just two people who'd forgotten how to rest. When the lights finally flickered back on, neither of us moved right away. She smiled faintly, a little embarrassed, and said, "You've officially earned your raise, you know?" But this time, there was no edge to her voice, just warmth. And I realized that the storm outside had only echoed what had been building quietly between us all along. The rain finally stopped sometime after midnight, but neither of us moved. Her office, still dim from the candlelight, felt suspended outside of time, like the rest of the city had gone to sleep and forgotten us. She sat on the couch, wrapped in my jacket, her hair slightly undone, her shoes abandoned on the floor. It was strange seeing her like that, unguarded, almost fragile. The woman who intimidated entire boardrooms now sat barefoot in the soft glow of a dying candle. "You should get some rest," I said quietly. She smiled without looking up. "You should learn to take your own advice." I chuckled under my breath, but it faded quickly. There was a heaviness in the air that neither of us wanted to name. "I wasn't always like this," she said after a long pause. "All work, all control. There was a time when I thought love and success could live in the same room." I didn't interrupt. Her voice was steady, but something behind it trembled. "I let someone in once," she continued. "It cost me everything I'd built. I told myself never again." She turned to look at me then, her eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "But lately, I've been thinking maybe I overcorrected." Her words settled between us like glass. Fragile, sharp, and impossibly clear. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to reach out, to close the distance, to show her that someone could meet her halfway without taking anything from her. But another part of me knew that moving even an inch closer would break the careful balance we'd built. So instead, I said, "You didn't overcorrect. You survived." Something in her expression cracked, the faintest shimmer in her eyes before she looked away. She brushed a strand of hair from her face and exhaled, slow and shaky. "Sometimes surviving feels like losing," she whispered. I stood, meaning to get more coffee, just to do something with my hands. But when I turned back, she was watching me. That same searching look from the night of her whisper. Only now it wasn't authority or confusion. It was need. She rose slowly, closing the small distance between us. Close enough that I could see the faint freckles beneath her makeup, the tired lines near her eyes. Her hand lifted slightly, hesitated, then rested gently on my arm. It wasn't a move of power. It was connection. Her fingers lingered for a breath, then slipped away. "I should go," she said softly. "Yeah," I managed, though my throat felt tight. As she gathered her things, I watched her in silence. The air still hummed with everything we didn't say, the confession that lived between glances, the truth both of us already knew but refused to speak. Before she left, she turned back and said, almost to herself, "You make it very hard to remember why I built these walls." And then she was gone. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds like nothing had happened. But the silence said otherwise. I arrived earlier than usual. The office smelled faintly of rain and coffee, the kind of clean air that only follows a storm. People moved around with the same routines. Phones ringing, printers humming. Yet everything felt slower, quieter. Her door was half closed. Through the gap, I could see her standing by the window again, the same place where it had all started. She was dressed immaculately, every line of her suit precise, every trace of vulnerability gone, except for her hands. She kept rubbing her thumb against her palm, a nervous gesture I'd never seen before. When she turned and saw me, she straightened instantly. "You're early," she said, voice calm, professional. "I wanted to finalize the board report," I replied. She nodded. "Good." That was all. The same word she used when things were finished, when emotion had no room to linger. But her tone carried something gentler now, as if she was trying not to let it show. The morning passed in quiet coordination. We discussed the proposal, exchanged notes, reviewed data. It was all surface, but under that surface, everything had changed. Every pause, every look carried the memory of candlelight and rain. At one point, I reached for a folder, and our fingers brushed again. It was nothing, yet the air shifted immediately. She froze, then smiled faintly. A small, tired smile that wasn't for show. When the meeting ended, I stood to leave, but she spoke before I reached the door. "Wait." I turned. She walked over slowly, holding a sealed envelope. "The board approved the budget. You'll get your raise starting next quarter." I tried to find words, but all I managed was, "Thank you." She placed the envelope on the desk between us, not handing it directly, but leaving it there, like a quiet boundary. "You earned it," she said. Her voice held no double meaning this time, no challenge, just truth. I nodded, but I couldn't stop looking at her. She noticed and for the first time didn't look away. Her gaze softened, and for a heartbeat, the distance between us dissolved again. "Last night," I started, then stopped. She smiled, just enough to stop me from saying more. "Some things don't need to be discussed," she said. "They just need to be understood." The words landed gently, but firmly. I left her office with the envelope in hand, the scent of her perfume lingering in the air, subtle like a reminder. That day I worked harder than I ever had. Not to impress her, not to prove anything, but because she'd seen me, really seen me, and it meant something. By evening, the city outside glowed again, and through her glass walls, I saw her glance up from her desk. Our eyes met just for a moment, and in that quiet exchange, I knew what she meant all along. The raise wasn't about money. It was about rising to the version of myself she believed I could be. By Friday, the office buzzed with the kind of nervous energy that comes after success. Our proposal had been approved, the investors were thrilled, and everyone wanted her attention. She moved through the day with her usual composure, confident, precise, untouchable. Yet each time our paths crossed, her eyes lingered just a second too long. I tried to act normal, tried to fold myself back into routine, the polite emails, the quick meetings, the steady rhythm of work. But it was impossible to forget the way the world had changed in one quiet night and one whispered sentence. When evening came, I stayed late again. Not because she asked, but because I didn't want the week to end without knowing what we were now. The office lights dimmed, the floor emptied, and somewhere down the hall I heard her door close softly. By the time I packed up my things, she was waiting by the elevator. She wasn't holding a briefcase or her usual planner, just her coat, draped over one arm. For once, she looked uncertain. "Heading down?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Long week." A small smile touched her lips. "You did well." I hesitated. "So did you." The elevator arrived with a soft chime. We stepped in together. The doors slid shut, sealing us into that small, humming space where silence always meant more than words. For the first few floors, neither of us spoke. The hum of machinery filled the space between us, steady and low. Then she turned slightly, her voice barely audible. "Do you ever think about how people see us?" "All the time," I said. "But I stopped caring about that the night you told me to earn it." She looked down, her lips curving. Not quite a smile, more like the beginning of one. "I shouldn't have said it that way. I'm glad you did." The elevator slowed as we reached the lobby. She looked up at me then, really looked, and for the first time since I'd known her, there was no armor left. Just a woman who had let herself feel something she wasn't supposed to. When the doors opened, I stepped out first, then turned back. She stayed where she was, one hand resting on the railing. I said quietly, "I hope I keep earning it." For a moment, she didn't answer. Then, as the doors began to close, her voice slipped through the narrow space, soft, almost a whisper. "You already are." The elevator sealed shut with a gentle echo, leaving me standing in the lobby surrounded by glass and city light. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the streets glistened with reflection, every surface catching fragments of gold and silver. I walked out into the night, the sound of her voice still following me. It wasn't a love story, not yet. It was something rarer, the quiet beginning of one. A connection neither of us had planned, but both had needed. And maybe that was the real raise I'd been earning all along. By Friday, the office buzzed with the kind of nervous energy that comes after success. Our proposal had been approved, the investors were thrilled, and everyone wanted her attention. She moved through the day with her usual composure, confident, precise, untouchable. Yet each time our paths crossed, her eyes lingered just a second too long. I tried to act normal, tried to fold myself back into routine, the polite emails, the quick meetings, the steady rhythm of work. But it was impossible to forget the way the world had changed in one quiet night and one whispered sentence. When evening came, I stayed late again. Not because she asked, but because I didn't want the week to end without knowing what we were now. The office lights dimmed, the floor emptied, and somewhere down the hall I heard her door close softly. By the time I packed up my things, she was waiting by the elevator. She wasn't holding a briefcase or her usual planner, just her coat, draped over one arm. For once, she looked uncertain. "Heading down?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Long week." A small smile touched her lips. "You did well." I hesitated. "So did you." The elevator arrived with a soft chime. We stepped in together. The doors slid shut, sealing us into that small, humming space where silence always meant more than words. For the first few floors, neither of us spoke. The hum of machinery filled the space between us, steady and low. Then she turned slightly, her voice barely audible. "Do you ever think about how people see us?" "All the time," I said. "But I stopped caring about that the night you told me to earn it." She looked down, her lips curving. Not quite a smile, more like the beginning of one. "I shouldn't have said it that way. I'm glad you did." The elevator slowed as we reached the lobby. She looked up at me then, really looked, and for the first time since I'd known her, there was no armor left. Just a woman who had let herself feel something she wasn't supposed to. When the doors opened, I stepped out first, then turned back. She stayed where she was, one hand resting on the railing. I said quietly, "I hope I keep earning it." For a moment, she didn't answer. Then, as the doors began to close, her voice slipped through the narrow space, soft, almost a whisper. "You already are." The elevator sealed shut with a gentle echo, leaving me standing in the lobby surrounded by glass and city light. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the streets glistened with reflection, every surface catching fragments of gold and silver. I walked out into the night, the sound of her voice still following me. It wasn't a love story, not yet. It was something rarer, the quiet beginning of one. A connection neither of us had planned, but both had needed. And maybe that was the real raise I'd been earning all along.